Hey guys, in this video I'm joined with Bradley. Now Bradley I did a video with a couple of years back, and Bradley is a very successful serviced accommodation operator. He's had a lot of success in the space. He's what I consider to be an expert, and in this conversation we're just going to dive in, ask Bradley how business is going, what advice he's got for those of you that want to start in service accommodation, and just see where the conversation goes. So Bradley isn't a student of mine, but he's someone I've known for a very long time, and I've seen his growth over the last few years as an individual, as an entrepreneur, but also with his service accommodation business. But yeah, let's jump in. So Bradley, thanks for joining me today. Of course, we did a video together 2 years ago at this point to discuss where we looked at the success you were having with your serviced accommodation business back then. For those that haven't seen it, I'll put a link to that video below this one. But how's business been since?
Yeah, no, it's been great, thank you. So obviously where we were at 2 years ago, I was sort of in the early stages of what I was looking to do in terms of scaling SA and scaling the business. So I can't remember the exact amount of units we had at the time, but now we've got, we've got about 30 properties. There's anything from the studio apartments that were in the last video, and 2, 3, 4, 5 bed houses that have been HMOs turned into SA units. We're just in the process at the moment of securing a number of contractors that are coming over from the Czech Republic, and they're going to be working in Coventry City, doing a lot of the building work. So yeah, business is going very well, thank you.
And so you're managing 30 units currently. Before we dive into that a little bit more, in your own words, for those that may be completely new to this, how would you define serviced accommodation, or how would you explain to someone on the street what is it you do exactly? What is your business model?
Yeah, so there's two parts to the question then, I guess. So what is service accommodation? So service accommodation is basically a hotel without staff. So rather than someone, say you've got a contractor, for example, you're going to have a number of guests that are going to stay in this particular property. So if you take a contractor, which is someone that's going to be working on maybe a building site, something like that, they would not want to go stay in a hotel for the week. So where my properties are based in Coventry, we've got a number of people from around the UK travelling to Coventry to do building work on a number of different developments.
Sure.
They probably wouldn't like to come and stay in a hotel because they then have to go out and buy their meals. They've got issues with parking, loads of different things. They want a home away from home. So what SA is effectively that. It's a hotel without staff. It is a home away from home. So when they come and stay in SA units, in mine or anyone else's around the UK, it's a place where they can go and they can cook their meal, they can sit down and watch TV. It's not necessarily all in one room. They can do their washing, their drying, and it's really a nice place for them to stay for a few days or a few weeks at a time.
Okay, and then I guess the second part to the question would be, what is your business model and how do you generate revenue and how do you make a profit from serviced accommodation?
Yeah, so what I do is over the past few years, is going out onto Rightmove or onto Zoopla or onto websites to approach landlords directly. And what we would do is find a property. We would pay the landlord or the estate agent the rent every month, which is guaranteed by myself and through a business. And then we would let out the property on websites like Airbnb and Booking.com and to corporate clients. And then, for example, if we're renting that property for £1,000 a month, we would guarantee that. And then we would try to look to achieve in and around about £100 a night. So if you do the quick maths on that, is you pay the landlord £1,000, you've got some bills and some fees, but then obviously there's a potential of £3,000 gross. So you take off your costs, so you can make yourself around about £1,000, £1,500 every month per property.
Okay, and what areas are you operating in, just to give context?
So in and around Coventry, in and around the Midlands. So I've personally got properties in Coventry. I'm taking some more properties on just outside of Coventry, a place called Kenilworth, and then, which a lot of people would know, and then Stratford-upon-Avon as well. And obviously the companies that I work with, the management companies I work with, have got properties all over the UK.
Okay, so you find someone that has the property already, that owns the property. Now, this is going to be typically a landlord that's in the past maybe previously rented it out as a single let, as like a buy to let or something, to one tenant on an AST, a short hold tenancy, typical rental agreement contract. However, you're proposing to them that you'll pay that market rent or maybe a bit below, and we'll dive into exactly how you negotiate and what you agree with the landlord. You then become an operator of that asset, and you maybe slightly redesign it inside, furnish it a certain way, you create some sort of marketing materials, some, get some photography done, and then you advertise it as serviced accommodation. Guests come in and you manage that process. So guests come in, there's going to be sort of cleaning, you have to replenish some things within the unit. So starting from the top then, so that 30 units you've got currently, and of course it's going to change month to month, but what would 30 units cash flow every month as a range maybe?
I think it's a good question because, and it's something I like to be completely honest about, is your nightly rates using the service accommodation model are going to fluctuate throughout the year. So they're going to be much higher in the summer and then lower in the winter months. So it's going to sound like two figures that are very far apart, but on 30 properties, it's going to be anywhere from £500 profit to probably 1,000 or a little bit over 1,000. So on a normal month, the properties will make around about 15,000 profit. So that's once you've paid the landlords, the bills, management costs, anything like that. And then on particularly good months, you could be upwards close to around 30,000 a month.
Okay, so anything from sort of 15 to 30,000 pounds net across all of those properties. And I guess depending on where the property is in the country, if it was in London, for example, or maybe down the coast, those numbers are going to be completely different. So let's talk about the most common question that normally pops up from people at this point is, well, if you're just renting the property from a landlord and then renting it out again, isn't that subletting, and isn't subletting completely illegal?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I started off a good few years back, I obviously made a few mistakes and didn't do things completely right just because I didn't have the right education. So I had to pick it up as I went along. So in terms of how subletting works then, subletting isn't necessarily illegal if you have permission. So the reasons that subletting might be illegal come down to things like mortgages and lending, and then it comes down to leases on big blocks of flats and things like that. So if you have, let's say for example, spoken to a landlord and you have said that I would like to take this property off you, it's very important that they approach their funder, their lender that's giving them mortgage on the property to say, actually, this is what we're going to be using the property as. It's not going to be on an AST, it's not going to be tenants, these are going to be guests in the property. Now there's very important how you approach this, because you don't want to go down the route of saying to a lender, well, the property is going to be let out on Airbnb and there's going to be a very high turnover of people, because a lender is going to be very concerned at who is going to be paying that mortgage. So if you get consent from that lender and you have consent from the landlord, you're not subletting the property. Very similar when you're taking on an apartment in a block of flats. It's very important that the head lease and the management agreement of that block states that you are allowed to let that property out as a holiday let, a furnished let. So to answer your question, sure. Subletting isn't illegal if you have the permissions.
Sure. And I guess an example I like to use is it's really not that different to maybe some of the biggest hotels in some of the biggest cities in the world. For example, in London, if you stay at a nice hotel, maybe at the top of Park Lane, it's very unlikely that that hotel operator owns the freehold of the building they're in. The building might be owned, the freehold might be owned by somebody else, but that hotel operator essentially has the leasehold, and they pay the lease every single month or every quarter, every year, and then that hotel then rents out their rooms on a night-by-night basis. They generate revenue, they pay their staff, they pay their costs, they pay their marketing, their admin, etc. And then what they have left is profit. And what you're really doing is just that, but on a smaller scale. Of course, with the difference between a hotel room and obviously a service accommodation unit.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think one of the best examples, and people that have spoken to me on the phone I've had chats with, are probably bored of me using this same metaphor all the time, but it's just Airbnb, it's just Uber, it's just Amazon on a smaller scale. We as
Yeah.
the whole rent to SA process. I mean, we don't own any of the properties. We don't need. I'm sure we'll go on to this, but we don't need the deposits and things like that. We don't need credit checks, and actually a huge amount of cash to get started. We are just doing an Uber where they don't own their own taxis. We are doing an Airbnb where they don't own their own properties. We are doing an Amazon where they don't own their own products. It's just that on a smaller scale. And so I think for people to bear that in mind as to how scalable this can be, once you understand how to structure a deal or two deals, you really are unlimited on how much cash flow you can make every month.
Sure. Yeah. And so essentially, you're an operator. You're not an owner of all 30 properties. Obviously, you can, if you on properties that you own, if you wanted to, you could rent it out as subs accommodation to increase the yield, increase the return on investment. But I think it's important to talk about how the kind of business model that you have, it's a cash flow business. It generates cash flow. Now, is it creating wealth? Well, not directly, because in my opinion, wealth is built from equity and increase in equity over time. But what you're doing is pretty much the gap between, on the one side, you've got someone that's maybe trading their time for money as an employee, as a 9 to 5. On one side of the spectrum, you've sort of got a completely passive investor who just owns assets and generates passive income from those assets. And you're sort of in the middle. You're an operator, you've still got a business, and it still requires some time input, some energy input, setting up the units, overseeing management, etc. But the cash flow that it generates is not directly proportional to the time you put in, and you're not trading your time for money. So it's a step away from being an employee. It's still active income somewhat, although really it is pretty passive. It's maybe not 100% passive, but this for a lot of people is a stepping stone to build up some cash flow, build up some liquidity that you can put into maybe some deals and buy assets that can obviously generate wealth over the long term and make that transition to entirely passive income, which of course I know you have plans for, which we'll talk about in a second. One question I wanted to ask, and I know a lot of people are thinking this, is, okay, you've got 30 properties you're operating and you have under management. Is that a management nightmare? Is your phone ringing off the hook all day, every day with problems? Are you stressed to the max and up to your eyeballs in admin tasks, trying to manage 30 properties and different guests coming in and out all of the time?
You would tend to think so if you explained it quickly to someone and you said, yeah, I've got 30 properties. I could literally have 30 people check in today and check out tomorrow. So, but to answer the question, no. What I do is I employ a management company, and they take care of the whole process. So the way it really works is I go out and find the deals, I structure the deals, I deal with the contracts, whether that's with agents or landlords, and I settle the property and furnish the property. From there, I work with a number of management companies in and around Coventry, and I will say to them, look, this is the property I've got, this is the figures that I'm very confident you can achieve, and I'll quite often run it by them as well. And they'll say, okay, well, we'll take on the property, they'll do the pictures, they'll list it on Airbnb and Booking.com, they will take care of the guests, they'll take care of the payments, they'll take care of the whole management process, including cleaners, inventory checks, absolutely everything. So really, my job is completed and really finished once the property is set up. So what the management company do is take care of the whole process. They deal with everything from start to finish. And so my job really is to go and keep expanding the portfolio to get more properties to pass back to the management company. But no, I don't have phone calls late at night. I literally get paid once a month by the management company. I then straight away go and pay my landlords, and I take the profit in between.
Perfect. There's a lot of alignment what you just said with sort of maybe how I run my property development business and how I see a lot of successful people run their property business. Their most important skill and their most important action item is to go out, find the deals and find good deals, because that is one of the most important skills you can have, and then put that deal together by setting it up correctly, bringing in the right team, in your case, furnishing it correctly, getting the right photography done, and then passing it on to the right person to then deliver on that, which is essentially for you to manage it. For me in the development space, we find the deal, we do the designs, we get the planning, we add value to it, and then we get the team set up to then deliver it. So we'll hire a mains contractor to go out and build it. And of course, it costs more to do that. It's going to cost you more to have somebody manage it and take all those tasks off your plate than it would if you to do it yourself. And the same with me, my development business. We would save a lot more money if we just went down a subcontractor route. We were trying to hire in and get on all the trades ourselves. But for us, our time is valuable. We believe our time is better spent on the most important stuff, like finding new deals or any future endeavors that you have. And so, of course, I guess same as for you. You pay that management company a bit of money. But what would you say about that? And what would you say in terms of sort of the most important skills that you have that has allowed you to build the success you've had with your portfolio?
I think it's probably two things. I think number one is research. I mean, if you don't know how to research a deal, no matter how good or how much money, how much spare cash you've got to set up these deals, and about how confident you are about approaching agents and landlords to get them secured, if you can't do the research to make sure the figures actually stack up, you're going to fall over at hurdle one. I mean, it's really, really important. So, for example, in terms of a bit of a process that people understand, is you're obviously going to be looking for the property on various different websites, but then you really need to be looking out what's out there, what's similar to what you've got, what is the property that's down the road that's going to be competing with you, how is it spec'd, what sort of price are they looking for, what's the size of their property. So I think number one, it definitely comes down to doing the research on the property before you even called an estate agent or a landlord directly to try and get the deal. Make sure it does stack. That's really, really important. And that is just due diligence, I guess, at the end of the day. Number two is really then approaching the agent or the landlord to try and get this deal secured. So it might sound a bit cheesy and a bit of a common thing to say, but when it comes down to relationships, it is so incredibly important. I mean, I felt the brunt of it, obviously, during COVID, so I had to have some very hard conversations with landlords. As you can imagine, the COVID situation was quite tough. I mean, I don't want anyone to get scared away by rent to SA because of COVID. It's all cleared up now. It's all gone. Life is back to normal, thank God. But there was some very hard conversations that we had where, as you can imagine, they closed Airbnb, and it was very tough. And we relied massively on that. So we had to become very resourceful. So we were dealing with people that had to self-isolate. We were dealing with people that couldn't leave the country or that had just got to the country, dealing with lots of medical staff. So the property still made money, but some months were a bit tough. So to answer your question, I think things that people need to understand to get good at this is doing the research in the first place, and then how to actually go out and approach people and landlords and build these good relationships with people.
Sure. Okay. So my next question then is, for you, you're at a point now, and we spoke about this previously between ourselves, you've got a couple more deals that you're working on that will be coming on soon, and it's almost at the point now where it's effortless for you to just attract new deals, get them set up, because at this point you've done it many, many times over, and it hasn't always been, of course, probably this easy for you. And I don't like to use the word easy because it's maybe a bit easier for you now, but of course there's still a lot of hard work that goes into the background and a lot of things. But hypothetical situation, if you were to start from scratch again, and from scratch I mean no contacts, didn't know people that you know now, no sort of reputation, so people didn't know that what you do and bring deals to you, and let's say you either had a few £1,000s in your bank, or alternatively you had an investor or a friend or a family member that was willing to loan you a few £1,000s to get set up on a simple loan agreement. What would you do and where would you start?
It's quite an interesting question because obviously from my past experience when I started out, the obvious thing would be just to find someone who knows what they're doing. And there's obviously going to be a lot of people out there that know how to do rent to SA that you can learn from. So probably go and find someone that knows what they're doing is number one. But really, I mean, to start off in the area you live in, because you know your area inside out. I mean, I know Coventry because I lived there for 21 years. I was constantly out in town. I knew what was going on. So I think that's probably a good place to start. I mean, when I was younger and when I actually started doing SA, I could never understand why people want to come to Coventry. And people watching this will probably realise that Coventry isn't the nicest place in the world, but it actually works really, really well for SA. I mean, we've got loads of things going on. We've got 2 universities, we've got hospitals, we've got Jaguar Land Rover, we've got Amazon, we've got loads of contractors coming to the area. So I think starting off where you know is probably key. And then it just really becomes a case of actually putting yourself out there and trying to educate yourself as much as possible, because what a lot of people stumble at is, well, what do I sort of go and say to people? I don't know how to approach it. And they get very nervous about that. And that's really just because they're only nervous because they're not educated on what to say. They're worried that if a landlord turns around and says, a bit like the conversation we just had, turns around and goes, well, that's subletting. And they go, yeah, you're right. And they panic. So I think spending some time understanding your area, then working out how you're going to approach people, so how you're going to approach agents and landlords, and then just start looking at properties. Just start looking on Rightmove, start looking on Zoopla and thinking, and I keep 2 things in mind that I think work really well with people. I think you want to find, obviously, a low monthly rent and a high nightly rate. And then you sort of want to go down the route of as well what your nightly rate needs to be to make sure you're going to be making some money. So I think keeping your head a calculation of sort of whatever your monthly rent is, dividing that by 10, that's what you need to achieve per night, is a good figure to keep in mind. But in terms of answering your question in such a not long-winded way, is know the area, but you're going to know your own area anyway, which is a great start. Then start looking on Rightmove and Zoopla, looking at properties, and just spending some time on Airbnb and Booking.com. I mean, it's at the end of the day, these deals aren't going to cost a huge amount of money to set up. And if you can just spend an hour or 2 when you get home from work, whatever you might be doing, just looking at properties and doing the research, it will put yourself in a very good place. But I think really actually just finding someone that knows what they're doing is a good start, because I didn't have that at the start, and I tend to think that if I had had sort of someone that could just talk me through it and knew what they were doing, and they could hold my hand, I would rather spend the money on them than rather spend the money on the deal, because it will just speed up the whole process massively.
So what were the biggest breakthrough moments with your journey, that maybe it was a light bulb moment, maybe it was a piece of advice you got that just allowed you to maybe push through a barrier you were facing at the time and just get to that next level?
It was getting more properties, because got to a point where I got plenty of properties, they're making good money, I was really happy guaranteeing the rent, and they're making good profit. And then one day, literally an estate agent called me that I'd had a property off before, and they said, Brad, I've got this 3-bed round the corner from the office, do you want it? And it just it gave me a lot more motivation to think, actually, I've built these very good relationships with people, where now, like you mentioned earlier about it being slightly effortless, if someone approaches you with a deal, it just feels unbelievable. And all you have to do then is, you've been approached with a deal, you go furnish it, make sure you do the research on it and spec out the property, and then you deal with the management company. Now that's how easy the process can be. But sometimes you think, why am I not getting another property? Why am I not getting another deal? You just have to go and put yourself out there. I mean, every single person I know knows what I do. So if my mate's sister's brother has got a property they're looking to sell, I might approach them and say, actually, would you look at renting this property for a number of years? Or they might have, someone might have passed away, for example, and they don't know what to do with the property, so we could take the property off them. So as long as everyone knows what you're doing, which is the situation I was talking about with the estate agent, they knew who I was doing a good job of managing the properties and looking after them. They just said, Bradley, here's another deal. And when you build up these relationships, as I've spoke about before, you will get that all the time with landlords and with estate agents.
And it's probably important to mention that this isn't something that happens overnight, because there is a bit of a flywheel effect to it, because you'll do one deal, maybe with one agent or landlord, and 6 months will go by, and then that landlord or agent will have another opportunity for you, and then you'll do that deal, and then you'll sort of gain more confidence. Your reputation and your personal brand around what you do will become more apparent, and then it will attract more and it will attract more. And so it's getting that momentum. Another question I wanted to ask you was, there's a lot of people that do serviced accommodation, and they'll do it to a point where maybe they've replaced their income. Maybe they're making £3,000 profit per month, £5,000 profit per month, which is of course still great money, which for a business model that can provide a lot of freedom if it's run properly as well. But what's the difference between somebody that's making £5,000 profit per month with service accommodation versus someone like yourself that's making £20,000-30,000 plus, and obviously not just having more deals, but the difference in maybe mindset, skill set, operations?
So I think it comes down to the mindset, definitely. I think knowing that you can just build this out to be as many properties as you can physically get your hands on, but more importantly, it's having the people that are looking after these properties. If you've got a big company that's managing these properties for you, and they've got too many properties in their belt, and the customer service isn't there, it's going to fall over quite quick. So I think finding a good local management company that knows what they're doing, that can deal with guests very well, that can get you bookings and advertise the property, is what's going to scale it. Because at the end of the day, I don't think the issue is going out and finding the deals. I think there's a lot of deals out there, but I think having them managed properly so you don't have any headaches and you're making money every month is the most important bit. So to answer your question, I think mindset, definitely, knowing that you could just keep scaling this and keep getting as many houses as you want, and you'll make tons and tons of money every month, which you can then reinvest into buying properties, which I think is what everyone should do. I think everyone should use the cash flow from this, as you say, to stop being an operator and become an owner. I mean, if you can own a property and run it as SA, that's the next level up. And then you've got the capital appreciation and you've got cash flow every month. But I think most importantly, even with that scenario, you need a good management company to look after it and do a great job of the property.
Let's look at an example deal then, so we can sort of look at what numbers and costs are involved. So I don't know if you maybe wanted to pick an example deal within your portfolio or just throw some sort of generic numbers out. If we look at sort of the revenue the property would generate, how that's calculated, and then the costs that are included within that.
Yeah, so one of the most recent deals I've got is a 3-bedroom house. It's quite an old style cottage, and the landlord lives in America. It's through sort of a friend of a friend of a friend. Again, people know what I do. And he wants £1,000 per month, and I have to pay the bills. So £1,000 per month plus the council tax, gas, water, electric, and some Wi-Fi, probably going to come in around about £300, let's say. So we're 1,300 in altogether. Now, what we're going to do is we're not going to just put double beds in each room, because we're looking for the area it's in is going to be contractor market led. It's got great parking outside. It's in a great location. So we're going to have 2 single beds in each room, obviously to maximise occupancy. So that would be a total of 6 people staying in the property. Now, obviously, we want to increase the occupancy, because then it reduces the price each person is paying. So if 2 people wanted to go stay in the property, we might be charging them what the cost of 6 people would be, if that makes sense. So if we charge people, for example, let's say 6 people at £20 per night, which when you've got big companies like building companies that are having contractors come and stay in an area, they don't mind at £20 per person per night, including everything. So if you do the maths, you do 6 times 20 is 120. If you do 120 over the month, and obviously you're trying to get as much as a month as possible, that is going to be 3,600. So that's what you will gross. Then obviously you're going to take off your rent and your bills. So off the 3,600, take off the 1,300, so it would be 2,300. So there's still plenty of cash to be made. You're going to have then obviously your fees in terms of the management company, maintenance, little things like that, cleaning fees, OTA commissions. So that property will make you around about 2,000 a month, which is just one deal. Which this is how incredibly scalable it is. If you can just keep finding these deals and understand the process, £2,000 per month from a property that you don't own, that you haven't have to get a mortgage on, You don't have to have a deposit. You don't have to have earnings. You just have to furnish it to a good standard and look after it. I think is an incredible business model.
Cool. Okay. Well, I feel at this point we've maybe sold a lot of people on service accommodation and talked about the money that can be made, the potential and the opportunity, and how hands-off it can be if it's run the right way. On the flip side, what would you say are maybe the downsides or the things that people maybe don't see sort of behind the scenes that you have to go through and you have to like experience as an operator?
Honestly, there's not a huge amount of downside. I think probably, if I could try and think of anything, it was probably just the COVID situation. I mean, I never take on deals that I don't think I've researched well enough. I never just do the research myself. I'll run it through X management company, Y management company. I'll talk to local businesses and hotels and make sure the deal stacks up. So there's really there's no pitfalls. It can get a bit daunting sometimes if you take on a number of properties. You've got a lot of rent that's going out every month.
Yep.
That can be quite daunting. But as long as you've done the research in the first place, that should never really be an issue. When it comes to guests staying in properties, people have this view about Airbnb and people having parties and places getting trashed. It honestly never ever happens as long as the management company has done the research and vetted that person that's going to stay in the properties. They're going to check their age, check their ID, check who they are, and just get a bit of a feel for what the person's like. Mm-hmm. So you never really have issues with the property. You never really have issues with the guest. Building good relationships with the landlords and with the estate agents so you get more properties. The pitfalls and the downside to it, there's not really a huge amount, if I'm completely honest.
Okay. Final point. There's going to be a lot of people that watch this. How old are you right now?
23.
So they're going to watch this. So they're going to see a 23-year-old who's making between £50,000 and £30,000 per month profit on a fairly hands-off business, and they're probably going to have doubts around how possible this really is, how easy this really is for you. You know, I'm sure you've experienced sort of objections and people sort of expressing their limiting beliefs before. What would you say to anyone who thinks maybe this is too good to be true, or it's not going to be possible for them, or maybe they have some limiting beliefs that are blocking their progress?
I completely understand, and especially how we've just had this conversation. It all completely sounds way too good to be true. How can you take on someone else's property, like a few grand a month, and not really do any work? I completely understand that. And what I think people will stumble at is a little bit about the subletting side of things, and then getting a really good understanding of that. And then I spoke to a few people over the past few months, and people who have tried this. The likelihood of starting to do this, and this is where people fall over, in my opinion, is they will go out and not know what they're doing. They will watch some very short videos here and there, and they will say, "Oh, I spoke to an estate agent, or I spoke to a landlord, and they said no, they don't want to do it. So this doesn't work. This property strategy automatically now is rubbish. I'm not a fan of it at all." When the reality is, with anything you do, and you've got to remember this is your own business, is it's going to take a few tries. It's not every landlord is going to want to do this. Some landlords will say, "No, I don't like the high turnover of people in my property. I completely believe in subletting, and I don't like this." And no matter what you say, no matter how good you are, how much knowledge you have, they will just say no, and that's that. And then that'll be the same with estate agents. Some more of the corporate agents will like it. Some of the more independents won't like it.
Yeah.
So you have to keep trying and keep going, and you will get rejected and get knocked back. But as long as you keep in the back of your head that someone at some point has got to say yes, and then it comes down to, obviously, as I said before, how you speak to them, how your relationships are, how your research comes across. And so when you're talking to people, you've got to make sure that if you're talking to a landlord or an estate agent, and they turn around and say that's subletting, you need to be able to educate them on how the fact it's not, and if you have the right permissions and things in place. So, I mean, I think people fall over because they think it's going to happen tomorrow. They think they can just go and approach someone and say, I want to do this deal, let's sign a contract, and then I'll make some money, which isn't the case. You really need to know what you're doing, build good relationships, and get really good at research.
Sure. Well, the fact of the matter is, for anyone that wants to have success in any business, in any business model, in anything in life, there is going to be resistance, and you can't expect to go out there, call up an agent tomorrow, or walk into an agent or speak to a landlord and say, look, this is what I want to do. And they said, yeah, brilliant idea. I've got a property for you, and you'll get it set it up, advertised, and be profitable month one. There is going to be resistance. There's going to be rejections. There's going to be people telling you why you can't do it. There's going to be people telling you it's not possible. There's going to be mistakes you're going to make. But I think what you did a really good job of saying there is you just have to be persistent. You just have to accept the fact that this is a momentum game, and you have to build up momentum, and you have to get educated, because the more educated you are, the more confidence you're going to have, the more conviction you're going to have when you speak to people, the more confident you're going to come across when you're speaking to people, and so they're going to be more likely to want to work with you and listen to what you're saying. But it is going to be a lot of resistance. It's going to be slow, but like you've proven, it is worth it, and you've been doing this for a few years now. Obviously, congratulations on all the success you've had with it. We're going to link your socials and some links below for anyone that wants to sort of get in contact with you, ask you any questions. Where is the best place for people to reach out to you?
Probably the best place is Instagram, just Mr. Bradley Clark. Just drop me a message, I'm always on there. To be honest, as we've sort of said throughout this phone call, is my day-to-day is pretty free, I guess, because the properties are all managed and looked after and very hands-off. So I'm obviously moving into other ventures and doing different things, with setting up some more contractors that are coming into the country, and then looking at some more development side of things as well. But for anyone that does want to get in touch, or just drop me a message and see how we might be able to work together, yeah, just Mr. Bradley Clark on Instagram.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining me. Hopefully we provided some value to the audience, and I'll see everyone soon. And Bradley, I'm sure I'll speak to you and have you on the channel again soon. So thanks again.